and saying it should have taken him 4 hours. It seems to have taken Dr. Teo a lot shorter than that. He did say, though, that he thought he was a very skilled surgeon. So that's interesting as well. And for everybody who's in the category of a self-funded retiree, they're listening to this whole debate about interest rates with a curious sense because, of course, in a way, well, not even in a way, absolutely, interest rates going up is good news if you're a self-funded retiree who's got money in the bank and you're relying on that deposit income. One of the frustrations is you can see the pain, maybe even of younger members of your own family with the mortgage rates, but they're not being similarly high with your deposit rates. The ACCC today has launched an inquiry into why there's this big gap between the rates for mortgages, which seem to go up, within a couple of hours of the Reserve Bank announcing a change, and those for poor old depositors.
I can't imagine why. Why would there be a gap? It's very curious,
I looked them up today,
it?
actually. These are just some of the figures. This is one of the big banks. If you put your money in, this is $10,000. I assumed you had $10,000, Josh.
Sure.
Manny, you're standing.
Yeah.
So I put $10,000 into the CanStar computer, and you can get 2.7 for a year, 11 months actually, 2.7 as a depositor. If you take out a home loan, 6%.
I've got some good news for you. Joel Gibson, the author of Kill Bills, was on the show earlier today, and he told us that that you can get 4.8% is the best offering at the moment on a savings account. So you actually if you shop around,
I did see that.
You can get in excess of 4.5% now.
That's right, and some of the smaller operators are operating at 4.7. But the big banks, that's the sort of gap.
I mean it's ridiculous.
6%.
It's absolutely ridiculous. But we all know they do this. We know that when interest rates go up, they pass it along immediately. When interest rates go down, they drag their feet. We know there's this ridiculous spread between interest rates. They are profit-making.
But can the ACCC do something about it?
Watch this space. You'll find out on
You
on
sound
Drive.
as if you think there's nothing to be done.
We'll see.
Maybe you're
We'll
right.
see. Perhaps I'm too cynical. Richard Glover up after the news headlines. Have a great afternoon and evening. I'll see you tomorrow.
Mornings with Sarah McDonald. Unmissable radio.
Cost of living, obviously, a huge issue.
The things that matter to you.
So many apartments are empty.
If you've amassed a fortune in criminal funds, it's more of a hassle than anything.
Important topics.
Tolls would be a tiny bit more palatable if there were no potholes. We didn't have to queue at a hospital.
Local issues.
The Great West Walk up to the Blue Mountains, it's already going through all these villages. If we just promoted those existing walks.
Mornings with Sarah McDonald from 8:30 on ABC Radio Sydney.
Good afternoon. Adam Story with ABC News. The Governor of the Reserve Bank insists lifting interest rates remains the best tool to tackle surging inflation. Philip Lowe has appeared before a Senate hearing in Canberra amid ongoing criticism of the RBA's decision to lift the official cash rate 9 times in recent months. The steep rise in interest rates has boosted the Commonwealth Bank's bottom line. Australia's biggest home lender saw after-profit tax for the first half jump by 10% to $5.2 billion. Unions New South Wales has praised the High Court for throwing out a spending cap on third parties in state elections. Legislation introduced by the government prevented third-party campaigners from working together, along with a spending cap of $20,000. The Premier has stopped short of ruling out further privatisations to fund a plan to raise the dam wall of Sydney's Warragamba. The state government last year pledged to raise the wall by 14 metres in order to future-proof Western Sydney from major flood events. The Defence Minister, Richard Marles, says a review into laws governing retired military personnel has recommended tighter policies and additional laws to ensure national secrets are protected. Last year, the Minister urgently asked his department to investigate reports Australians were approached to help train Chinese military. Desperately needed aid has started to flow from Turkey into rebel-held northwest Syria 8 days after the devastating earthquakes. Syria says there will be no discrimination between government and rebel-held zones when it comes to distributing the aid. At least 3 people are now known to have died after the Cyclone Gabrielle lashed New Zealand's North Island. 2 people died overnight, and this morning the body of a missing firefighter was recovered. And Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro, is reportedly planning to return to the country next month to lead the opposition. The Wall Street Journal says he's also pledged to defend himself against accusations that he instigated violent riots last month. Partly cloudy in Sydney this afternoon, sunny tomorrow 28, sunny on Friday, a top of 30. More news at 4.
You're listening to Drive with Richard Glover
on ABC Radio Sydney.
G'day, Richard Glover with you on ABC Radio Sydney. Hope you're well. Today, Lowe no longer. Philip Lowe defends the Reserve's interest rate rises and says there may be more to come. Also today, online gambling has traditionally sold itself as a malware. Let's check the traffic.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
And Jeff Wallace is here from the Australian Traffic Network. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Richard. On camera, multi-vehicle crash on the M4. It's at Granville, adjacent to the Church Street on-ramp. It's heading up towards Mays Hill. We've got delays back towards Homebush, past Centenary Drive into Auburn. North Sydney, a breaking out truck on the freeway. He's approaching Falcon Street, lane 2. Delays behind him. Also, waterfall emergency work affecting southbound the Princess Highway at Cooraban Street. I'm Jeff Wallace from the Australian Traffic Network.
Jeff, thank you very much. Now, I wonder if you, like me, read the advice column, the financial advice column in Wednesday's Sydney Morning Herald. It fascinates me, frankly, not because I've got any great questions of my own to ask, but people ask really quite normal questions about their pension and superannuation and selling a house and buying a house and how what the law is. And the columnist is a really, terrific writer. It's very clearly spelt out, but it's so complicated. And the rules, I feel I'm relatively well informed. I certainly been reading this column for years, and yet I find myself entirely baffled by these things all the time, whereby if you sell this item in that order and you reverse the order and you do it this way around, you'll be 20% off or 20% worse off. And if you remove your you remove your money from the one I read the other day, if you remove, I think I got this right, if you remove your money from superannuation a couple of days before you drop dead, there's no tax on it. But if you leave it in superannuation, the government gets 15%. So he's saying, this guy's writing and saying, my wife's a bit unwell. Get in quick. Get her to take her money. Oh, God. And I think all the time, I never knew that rule. I never knew this rule. It's so complicated. And then you think to yourself, well, I'm not ready for retirement yet, but I think to myself, well, when I retire, I'm obviously going to have to get a financial advisor to tell me how this all operates and what I should do, and should I get a part pension, or should I get a whatever they call it? You get I think it's an annuity off your super, or should you take it as a lump sum? And I just don't know. But then I look into getting a financial advisor, and it seems that they're hugely expensive, and also you keep on reading stories in the paper about the scandals involving financial advisors, so you think, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I should try to do it myself. And then you read the next column the next week and you realise it's too complicated. Is there a better way? Peter Martin is a visiting fellow at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University. He's been writing in the conversation about the dire state of financial advice and the availability of financial advisors in this country. And he joins us here on Drive. Peter, good afternoon.
G'day.
It's so complicated.
And it shouldn't be. That's the first thing to say. It is a disgrace that we ask people when they're approaching 65, whatever the age is, who may not be numerate, and there's no crime in not being numerate, right? When we ask them to make really complicated decisions, we can leave that to one side, but that we're all in this situation is a disgrace, and we should have designed systems so that, well, like you said, so we don't have that complexity.
It does seem as if there are so many sort of rules and sub-rules, and, it's just we've created a bafflingly complex system that requires really up-to-date advisors to navigate it at all.
Yeah, someone to hold your hand. Now, it used to appear to be good, Richard. It used to be that people would hold your hand for free. You didn't have to pay them a cent. You go and see these financial advisors that steer your money into certain accounts, do that for you, check in on you if you're lucky. Certainly they'd charge you each year for checking in on you. Oh, no, not in cash, never pay them. But they would, I can mention the name of a fund just because it's gone out of business, but they might put you into BT, right?
Mm-hmm.
And BT would pay them, say, 0.5% of your sum each year. And bear in mind, not only does that accumulate, but because your sum grows each year, it ends up being an awful lot of money for a simple visit that cost you nothing. And they used to steer people, not all of them, but, let's put it this way. They wouldn't steer you into things that didn't pay them a commission.
Okay.
That's how it used to be, and that was wrong.
Very self-interested. So that's why we said, okay, well, and then, of course, there was the Royal Commission, which revealed all terrible practices such as charging dead people for advice and all that sort of stuff. So then we decided, okay, let's change the financial advice system and bring in a law that you can't do it on commission like that model. You've got to have a fee, pay a fee, and actually there's quite a lot of paperwork to make sure you're acting in the client's interests and not in your own. Now, the problem about that, and a lot of people cheered that on, I think including people like you.
I cheered it on.
Yeah, it's created this incredible reduction in the number of financial advisors, and the few that are left are charging a mozza.
Yeah, and by the way, there are some of them you can't get in to see if you've only got $1 million, like $2 million is the minimum. So what happened is all of these people, and, you know, a lot of them didn't mean badly, right? You know, a lot of them really helped people, albeit being paid through commission, left the industry because they put in all of these education requirements. Good thing, right? They said you can't receive kickbacks if you're a financial advisor. You'll have to charge up front. You can receive kickbacks still if you're a mortgage broker or you sell insurance. But financial advisors can no longer get them. And the paperwork, Richard, have you ever used a computer, signed up for an app and had to click agree? Well, it's worse than that, right? No one reads it. So what has happened, and the previous government commissioned a report on this from Michelle Levy, lawyer, and this government has now released the report, is that we now have half as many financial advisors in a country of, 26 million? We have 16,000 financial advisors. We used to have double that, 28,000. They won't see people. The typical fee, according to her report last year, $3,700. And while that may actually be less than we had to pay when the money was taken out invisibly and shoveled towards them, in kickbacks, while that might be less, it's not money a lot of people have. So her report is of the view, and she has persuaded me. It's said to be a mark of maturity to admit you were wrong. Okay, I was wrong. I was supporting the idea that they have to act in the, quote, best interests of the client. What she's arguing is that, and that, by the way, that throws out people from banks were told to not give advice. Super funds can't give advice, and they could if they went through all the rigmarole, but they don't. What she's proposing is that employees of banks, employees of super funds, be able to offer advice. Sure, you'll know, in the same way as when someone sells you a fridge in a showroom, they're being paid by the, they get money from it. But
or Peter, that shirt they say makes you look handsome.
Yeah, it's amazing, actually. I get a lot of admirers when I go shopping. So, and they're being paid to do it. So, but she says, and it's a subtle idea, and it's not, sort of an idea that I supported before. I was saying, no, best interest of the client, full stop. She's saying that's too expensive, too difficult to look at a client's situation every time. People should merely have to, and it should be enforced in the law, employees of banks, employees of super funds should merely be required to offer you good advice. And you can tell what bad advice is. I mean, it's really bad to tell you to take out an insurance policy if you don't have any money to do it or whatever. But that we should be able to get simple advice in the same way as the person who sells me clothes doesn't assess my whole wardrobe, doesn't assess my whole love life. She just says, you look nice in that, and it's probably better than this.
And so what that means is that good advice does not need to be comprehensive. No. You can just be advising Peter about whether it's better to put the money in super or his mortgage. You don't have to make it a lifetime plan.
Yes, and she calls it good advice. That would be the legal word, and that has a legal meaning already. But what it would really mean is not bad advice, not demonstrably, provably bad. You could take someone to court, or the authorities would take someone to court if a financial advisor, told you to buy a house, withdraw all of your savings when you couldn't afford the mortgage payments. That would be bad advice. But that no longer would financial advisors would still have to give perfect advice, but there'd be a whole class of other people who could help people out. And right now, we've got nearly everyone most Australians are completely in the dark. I'm forming the view that that's worse than not having perfect
And so
advice.
under this new definition, super funds and banks and so forth would be able to give limited good advice. She gave quite an emotional example from her own life, didn't she, Michelle?
Yes.
Michelle Levy, the quality of advice reviewer. She says she's got a daughter with a disability, she says, who does not know the difference between $10 and $10,000, and yet she's got a bank account. She wants her disabled daughter, to be able to get a bit of a helping hand from the bank to understand her finances, which at the moment is not really available.
That's right. A bank teller has to say, well, look, I'm sorry, I can't comment on that. Otherwise, they're in trouble because they're not licensed and they haven't done a complete assessment. And her daughter actually, she said, has 3 bank accounts, one labelled fun, one labelled essential, one labelled something else, which she said in parentheses is a pretty good life. But her daughter doesn't know the meaning of money. As she said, her daughter doesn't know the difference between $10 and $1,000. And that was, look, I don't like being persuaded that I'm wrong. I've pushed very hard for this for 25 years for no conflict of interest. And clearly someone who works in a bank has a conflict of interest. I've pushed very hard for no conflict of interest, and I've pushed very hard for best interests. And I can now see that sort of good enough is a lot better than no advice at all. So I have today publicly changed my mind. And by the way, I didn't change my mind until I'd read her full report.
Michelle Levy.
The government now has to decide whether it will change its mind. And Stephen Jones, the Assistant Treasurer, will have a consultation process.
Okay, but I mean, by the sound of things, they've got to do something. They're just not anywhere near as many financial advisors available as the Australian population needs, given the complexity of the law. Peter Martin is here, visiting fellow at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University. Just about that, the complexity of the law, the fact why unless you're trying to do something complicated, why should you need financial advice? Most people just want to, earn some money, pay their taxes, have some investments, hopefully, retire either with the help of the government or on your own. That's what we want. And yet it's so complex. It's so complex. This is from Mary. Your conversation about retirement and money is spot on. I'm a well-educated, reasonably intelligent woman who feels totally overwhelmed by the complexities of my very basic finances, super and the pension. Penny from Willoughby agrees. It's impenetrable. I've worked as a lawyer in banking and funds management for 30 years. It's never been more confusing, with only the wealthy able to afford advice. It's time to start again. Perhaps just give everyone the aged care pension and let our progressive tax system sort out the rest. Is there any move on to try to reduce the complexity of it? The fact that the most simple question to, I think he's called Noel Whittaker, isn't he, in the Herald? The most simple question to Noel Whittaker gets them, and well written, and I'm not criticising him, but the most complex and baffling advice.
If we were starting again, we probably wouldn't have introduced superannuation. I say that because the concessions for super cost something approaching what the pension is now. So we could afford to give people a larger pension. That would remove a whole lot of rules you needed to worry about. Everyone would get the pension. Kerry Packer, well, he won't get the pension, but his son will get the pension. Not. Of course, they'll save more because they'd want more than the pension. But everyone would get something. It would be simple. Unfortunately, we're not starting from there. And every time they sort of you tweak a rule and you introduce an unintended concept, and that's why we need financial advisors. I can't see anyone undoing super as we have it.
But in the meantime, at least let your superannuation fund give you some good advice, and maybe even your bank teller give you some good advice.
Oh, by the way, Richard, there is one thing to do, aside from there's an advice line. Each year now with your tax return, the ATO through MyGov reports on the performance of your super fund and recommends another one you can go to if yours is poorly performing, and it's one click. That's only come in a year ago, and that's the sort of thing we need.
All right.
You can just change with one click, like changing a mobile phone. You don't even need to talk to your old fund.
All right, a bit more simplicity, please. But in the meantime, yes, the government will now consider this report of Michelle Levy's Quality of Advice Review. But, yeah, according to Peter Martin, it's pretty compelling that we've got to do something to ease up the number of people that can give us financial advice, given the complexity of the system. Hey, Peter, thanks so much.
Great pleasure.
There's Peter Martin from the ANU referring to Michelle Levy's Quality of Advice Review, which is online and, as he says, makes pretty compelling reading. 1300 222 702 is the number. On the text 0467 922 702.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
Quickly check the traffic and then we might go over to New Zealand where the death toll from that terrible cyclone is growing. We now have 4 people confirmed to have died in the Cyclone Gabrielle disaster. North Sydney, Warringah Freeway approaching Falcon Street, a truck breakdown there. 1 of 6 northbound lanes closed. It's lane 2. If you're in Greystanes, the M4 motorway just below the Cumberland Highway overpass. They've cleared the site, but still multiple vehicles involved in a crash westbound. And finally in Clyde, the M4 motorway just past Church Street on-ramp. 3 vehicles involved in a crash there with significant delays westbound. That's the latest here on Drive.
You're with Richard Glover on ABC Radio Sydney.
Well, New Zealand's Prime Minister has declared a state of emergency after a weather event not seen, quote, in a generation. 4 people are confirmed to have died in the Cyclone Gabrielle disaster now, with extensive damage in coastal communities on the far north and east coast of the North Island. Authorities estimate more than 10,000 people have been displaced. There have been hundreds of rescues as well. Sarah Robson is from the Detail News podcast on Radio New Zealand and joins us here on Drive. Sarah, good afternoon.
Kia ora.
We have got this mounting death toll, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely tragic news. The latest figures that the Prime Minister Chris Hipkins has just mentioned in a briefing. There have now been 4 confirmed deaths, including the death of a child in the Hawke's Bay region who was swept away by rising floodwaters yesterday afternoon. Now, there are still several people who are missing for whom the police have very grave concerns. So there is a very real possibility that that death toll could rise. Now, at the moment, the police say that they have got 1,400 people on a list of people who are uncontactable at this stage. Now, about 1,100 people have been located and found, so there could be some double-ups between those 2 lists, but certainly with communications into Hawke's Bay and Gisborne on the east coast of the North Island, cell phone coverage is still extremely hard to come by. Internet, forget it. I saw a message from one friend in Hawke's Bay. She managed to get some Wi-Fi near Napier's airport. She couldn't read messages, but she could get something out to say she and her family were safe. So there are a lot of anxious people just desperately trying to get in touch with people in those extremely hard-hit areas who just simply have not been able to get through. We also just heard just recently on RNZ's Checkpoint program this horrific story of this couple who were house sitting a place in Esk Valley, just north of Napier. It's a very significant wine region, and the house was completely inundated, covered the entire roof. The 2 people who were house sitting managed to get up into the ceiling cavity, and while one of them has been able to be rescued, his partner was swept away in the floodwaters and she has not yet been found. There are just so many tragic stories coming out, and more to probably come out in the next few days as we really begin to get a sense of just how massive Cyclone Gabrielle has been.
You mentioned the child's death in Hawke's Bay and the difficulties of communication in Hawke's Bay. Does that seem to be the epicentre of it, if that's the right word?
Gisborne and Hawke's Bay are certainly the epicentre and the hardest hit areas. Over the last couple of days, the rivers in those regions have just risen to levels that no one has ever really seen before. The comparison that has been made throughout this disaster is to Cyclone Bowler back in 1988. Now, this was actually before I was born, so I unfortunately have no kind of first-hand sort of knowledge of it, but you are hearing accounts from people who were around these kind of quite provincial, rural areas of New Zealand who are saying this is worse than Bowler, or this is as bad as it was during Cyclone Bowler. And that's where you get Chris Hipkins' comment, this is a once-in-a-generation kind of storm, certainly the most severe weather event of this century. So what we've had today, as some communications have been re-established, we've got the Defence Force going into both Hawke's Bay and Gisborne. Now, there are some towns that are completely cut off. They have got dwindling supplies of food, their water supplies have been cut off, and so far some of their communications have only been via satellite phone. Now, because of the weather, getting helicopters and aircraft into some of these areas has been pretty dicey. But the small town of Wairoa, which is home to about 8,000 people, it's not too far north of Napier, they're expecting to be cut off from Napier for months because the road is in just completely terrible shape. They have been able to get some supplies into there today, food, water, medicine, and they're actually bottled water as well. And they actually have been able to set up a barbecue in town to help feed, the thousands of people in that town who are facing, they've got no power, no cell communications, and in a pretty dire situation.
And that presumably is an extreme example with the road cut off for months of something which at some level is going to be felt in so much of the country, just roads cut and being taking weeks or months to be rebuilt.
Oh, that's exactly right. Well, we've had a horrendous summer of storms. Now, the Coromandel, which is further north of Gisborne, it's one of the tourism jewels of New Zealand. They have been hammered for the last 5 weeks by storm after storm after storm. Now, they have been cut off time and time again. The state highways are an absolute mess, just dropouts, slips. Again, communities isolated. And while some of these areas are used to these sorts of weather events, Cyclone Gabrielle is at a completely different scale. There are bridges between sort of two cities, Napier and Hastings. All of them have been taken out. Further north along the east coast, north of Gisborne, that road, plenty of slips. Those communities are fairly isolated and used to being cut off. But again, this is a completely different scale of situation, and there are going to be some huge rebuilds needed once this initial kind of urgent response phase, once we get through the next few days here.
Obviously, the rebuild is to come, but in terms of current weather, things are calmer now, aren't they?
Yeah, there has actually been a break in the weather. Now, I'm based in Auckland. Now, Auckland has also been hit pretty hard over the last few weeks with some record flooding at the end of January, and then another couple of storms sweeping in. Now, when I got up this morning, I was actually quite relieved to see some blue sky out there. So the weather has settled down. The weather has also settled down a wee bit in the Gisborne and Hawke's Bay regions. Now, everyone is on high alert for any sign of rain. Now, many of these rivers are actually still running pretty high, so it wouldn't take that much more rain for it to become a fairly dangerous or dicey situation again. So authorities are certainly keeping a very close eye on that. But, there is some relief, particularly in Auckland, where there is also a massive cleanup job happening over on the west coast. Landslides have, again, isolated coastal communities. They've got no power, no supplies, no way in or out. This brief reprieve from the weather is good to see, but, everyone is definitely still just on edge.
Yeah. Well, we know you really felt for us during the fires and floods, and we are really feeling for you during this, just as we did during Christchurch. But natural disasters are such a terrible thing, but I'm sure the resilience of the New Zealand people will show you through. Hey, Sarah, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you so much.
So Sarah Robson from the Detailed News podcast from Radio New Zealand with a very vivid portrait of what's happening on the other side of the ditch. Lots coming up, including gambling's new audience. They're targeting now the female gambler. More on that in a second. It's 4 o'clock.
Adam Story with ABC News. A disciplinary hearing has heard that the rationale behind one of Dr. Charlie Teo's controversial brain surgeries was nonsense. Isabel Rowe reports.
Sydney neurosurgeon Charlie Teo is fronting a professional standards committee over complaints he should not have operated on 2 brain tumour patients in 2018 and 2019. Dr. Teo allegedly told one woman she had a 5% chance of death from surgery, but another neurosurgeon called as a witness says that was falsely low and there was no benefit from such a surgery. Another surgeon said the rationale for operating was nonsense. Dr. Teo maintains he has many grateful patients. He's fighting to have restrictions on his medical licence removed.
2 people are missing in a mine incident in northwestern Queensland. Emergency services are on their way to the Dougal River mine site, 70 kilometres northwest of Cloncurry. The Dougal River predominantly produces zinc concentrate with byproducts including lead and silver. It's an underground mine wholly owned by MMG Limited. The mine employs about 500 people and contractors in a mix of fly-in, fly-out and local residents. A child's body has been recovered in New Zealand's North Island, taking the death toll from Cyclone Gabrielle to 4. Police say they believe the child was caught in rising floodwaters yesterday in the Hawke's Bay area. Much of the island has been battered by heavy downpours and gale force winds, causing severe flooding and landslips. An airbase manager in Hawke's Bay, John Hayes, says rescue crews have been stretched to their limit.
So the last 24 hours has been pretty busy. Obviously yesterday was a major rescue effort, recovering literally hundreds of people off roofs around the Hawke's Bay area.
The Disability Royal Commission has heard a major disability service provider has improved its training since the Commission heard evidence about abuse and failings at a day program. Today, Chief Executive at Ford, Joanne Toohey, was questioned about what had changed at the organisation. Ms Toohey was not CEO at the time the abuse and failings are alleged to have happened. She told the Royal Commission Ford has upgraded its training and information management and has created a new safeguard team.
The organisation now is using that internal central team, particularly around practice leadership, safeguarding and behaviour support. They're using that team for advice a lot now, which is great because that's what we wanted to happen with that team.
The latest data from the Bureau of Statistics shows an acceleration in parents leaving the public school system for the private sector. Here's National Education reporter Connor Duffy.
The 2022 ABS Schools data shows that a record number of Australian students are now educated at private schools. More than 1.4 million Australian students, or 35.6% of the student population, are now in the independent or Catholic systems. Overall, public school enrolments fell by 0.6% last year, despite cost of living pressures and rising interest rates. Private school enrolments haven't grown this quickly since 2009.
Japan says it will review the use of weapons to bring down spy balloons after revealing 3 intrusions into Japanese airspace over recent years. North Asia correspondent James Oaten reports.
The Japanese government says after reanalysing past cases of unidentified flying objects, it now strongly suspects 3 Chinese balloons flew over Japan in 2019, 2020 and 2021. The government's called on China to verify the facts and ensure it doesn't happen again. Japan's military can only use force for self-defence or emergency evacuations, but the Ministry of Defence says that's being reviewed. It comes after the US shot down a Chinese balloon earlier this month and 3 other high-altitude objects. James Oaten, ABC News, Tokyo.
US air safety officials have launched an investigation into why a Boeing jet unexpectedly lost altitude and nearly plunged into the Pacific Ocean. The United Airlines flight had taken off from Maui in Hawaii in December when it suddenly plummeted 400 metres. It then stabilised at just 230 metres and went on to land safely in San Francisco. The board tasked with investigating plane crashes will release a report on the incident in 3 weeks' time. In sport, Toby Green has been announced as the sole captain for the GWS Giants for the upcoming AFL season. The 29-year-old was part of a 3-man captaincy group last season. Green has had some controversial on-field moments in his decorated career and says he's had to learn a lot to be elevated into the captaincy.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't linear from day one. I've had a lot of learnings along the journey, and had a few stuff-ups as well, and learn a lot more from them than what you do otherwise.
A shower or 2 on the north coast this afternoon, fine and mostly sunny elsewhere, partly cloudy in Sydney, sunny tomorrow, 28. It's 4:05.
You're listening to Drive with Richard Glover on ABC Radio Sydney.
G'day, Richard Glover with you on ABC Radio Sydney. Today, low no longer. Philip Lowe defends the Reserve's interest rate rises and says there may be more to come. Also today, online gambling has traditionally sold itself as a man's... You're talking about how complicated the financial rules are, things like the way the superannuation system and the pension system and the tax system all kind of operate together, and just how difficult it is. Actually, Mary puts it well. I have no argument with the rules, she says. The problem is knowing what the rules are so you can follow them. For instance, I was retired, had an excellent financial planner. He set up my superannuation, but then he retired. I tried to clarify with Centrelink, possible part pension, but kept getting conflicting advice, so I decided to email Noel Whittaker. He's a guy I mentioned who writes the column in the Herald. He kindly and promptly provided the answers to my questions. Thank God for him, because the Centrelink staff were as confused as I was. Thanks to that Wednesday column, I applied for a Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, says another listener. It took a whole day to fill in the application form with various documents, and then I had to find more documents from my super fund, which I was then told Centrelink already had. I think it's a deliberate policy to discourage people from getting what is their right to have. So hard to get advice, so few financial advisors now. They're dropping like flies, basically, because of the new laws, and they're charging a hell of a lot of money if you can get one to see you. That's the problem we discussed with Peter Martin. One little idea, actually. This is from Greg he sent it to me on Twitter. He says, I'm following the financial advice segment. I'm reminded of Nick Bruning's segment on Nightlife. He's part of the Certified Independent Financial Advisors Association. That's a valuable resource for listeners. So yes, it's great that Nightlife does that. Ring in. Nick might be able to help you with your problem, or you can write into the Herald, and Noel might be able to help you with it. But really, should we be necessarily relying on newspaper advice columns and radio advice columns with these basic questions? Couldn't either the system be easier or the ability to get advice be somehow streamlined? It's currently 8 minutes past 4 here on ABC Radio Sydney. When you think about gambling ads targeting young people, what's the first thing that comes to mind? I guess it's a narrator with a blokey voice who uses the word lads and talks about having a pint and a punt with your mates. Well, online gambling companies are now trying to target young women to maximise their client base. This is according to researchers, and they're going about it in new ways. For example, there's this TikTok, which was posted in the lead up to the Super Bowl.
All right, now for the only Super Bowl bet that actually matters, what song do we think the Queen is going to play first? Not going to lie, I genuinely couldn't care less about football, but I do love a good Super Bowl party and a good halftime show. However, this year I'm going to do something to make it a little bit more exciting. I'm going to be betting on the game through Bodog. Bodog has made it so easy to figure out how to bet, and I'm feeling pretty confident that I might actually cash in this year. Even if you don't care at all about sports, they're actually going to be opening markets to bet on Rihanna. Plus, you bring out ASAP, odds on the first song, and I just think that makes game day 100 times better. Check out the website and good luck.
Okay, if you don't want to bet on football, what about on what song Rihanna is going to sing? That's a TikTok posted on the platform by creator Marina Santa Rosa, promoting a US gambling company. Dr. Simone McCarthy is from the Institute for Health Transformation at Deakin University and joins us on Drive. Simone, good afternoon.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for having me.
This is one tiny sign, but among a lot of others, that just in the way people might remember during, when cigarettes were so common, there was a real move to suddenly start selling cigarettes to women, and there were women's brands and brands that were, Virginia Slims was targeted to feminist women even. This seems like a similar moment.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Tobacco, when these companies saturated the male customer base, they started designing female-specific products and advertising heavily featuring women, which is exactly the same strategy that the gambling industry is using, designing these betting markets in line with women's interests. And this is a new warning that they are coming after a new customer base.
I thought gambling ads were banned, I don't know about America, but here anyway, were banned on places like TikTok.
Yeah, so despite TikTok's Australian ad policy prohibiting ads sponsored by gambling companies, an Australian sports betting company recently received permission to run a series of ads on on TikTok. And these appeared around the same time as the Spring Racing Carnival. And they've just popped up again more recently, advertising these novelty betting markets, which allow you to bet on things like reality TV, global events, and award shows. Really things that align with what women are interested in, appealing to that market that might not be interested in betting on sport.
Okay, let's listen to an example of the game. Again, it's a TikTok on the Sportsbet platform by a Sydney-based influencer.
Okay, apparently this is jockey called J-Mac. Yeah, J-Mac. And he is apparently the best of the best, according to the Sportsbet app, and he's going to be wearing blue. So I thought, why don't we do a little matchy match and be front of mind? When guys see us, they'll be like, oh my God, picked a winner. Oh, fascinators are just like so expensive. Do people even wear them anymore?
Yeah, so fascinators might be the subject of a speciality bet. So is there any sign that it's working? The market is still probably mostly a male market, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. We know from the data that participation rates for women are roughly the same as men, about 70%. Of women engaging in gambling at least once a year. And recent prevalence data shows that it's about 2% of women betting on sport. But in our research, we've talked to lots of young women over the last couple of years who are increasingly engaging in betting. And this is only growing as gambling becomes more normalised for women. So they're definitely gambling with their friends around times like the AFL or NRL Grand Final. Betting with their boyfriends as a way to do something together and connect, so that it's really normalised among this kind of next generation of young people, both women and men.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see whether this novelty betting will be the gateway for them, so that they might bet on who's going to win Australian Idol, but then the next thing is they'll start betting on the more conventional sports betting and horses and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. This advertising really prompts women to sign up to a betting account to be able to bet on something like the Bachelor finale, something they feel confident in. But what happens below the line is the gambling company is able to send them text messages and emails to nudge women to engage in gambling more regularly. And this might make it seem quite normal to gamble, therefore creating a whole new customer base for the gambling industry.
Okay, in other words, once you've made one single bet, maybe on something big in your mind, like the Australian Idol grand finale, you might be thinking this is a thing you're going to do once a year, but they've got your details there and they're going to be nudging you.
Yeah, and there's also a range of different gambling environments that young women are attending as well. So as well as seeing the advertising on things like social media, it's also quite normal for women to attend horse racing events. They're attracted to the glamour and the dressing up of these events. And women in our research say that when they attend gambling environments, they feel a pressure to gamble in order to fit in with their social group.
It's interesting too. I mean, the two examples I played were both from TikTok, and they were both influencers, one American and one Australian. It's again this sort of shadow world, isn't it? Where I suppose it's pretty obvious it's a straight ad, but it's often couched in very casual language, often around jokey language, almost as if it's sending up the world of gambling, even while it's being an ad.
Yeah, and despite them being gambling ads, these TikToks look exactly like every other TikTok. I'm a young woman who engages on TikTok, and the TikToks we see look exactly the same as these ads. So it may be normalising gambling as an ordinary activity for young women to engage in, which is really where the concern lies.
Yeah, well, they certainly had a lot of success with cigarettes and Virginia Slims and all of that, which seems so bizarre all these years on. I was looking at them the other day, the ad for Virginia Slims, and it's all about, if you want to be a tough, forceful woman, face down the patriarchy almost, you'll smoke this, cancer-causing product. And again, it's this selling of something which is so destructive. But sold as if it's some sort of way of making friends with your, as you say, your boyfriend or your group of female friends, female empowerment almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And governments really need to acknowledge the range of strategies that gambling companies are using to attract new customers. We predicted that the gambling industry would do this because of the playbook of tactics from the tobacco industry. It's almost copy for copy. So the government's really behind on this one, and they need to be ensuring that they act on and restrict some of this harmful marketing.
Are there other ways we can tackle this before they get their way and addict the half of the population they haven't already addicted?
Yeah, absolutely. And even if we look at public health campaigns at the moment that aim to raise awareness of gambling harm, women are often quite stigmatized in those campaigns. They're often presented as the girlfriends to the men who gamble, and they don't present the reality that shows that women are gambling with their friends and partners and are susceptible to the tactics of the gambling industry. So I think what's important is we need to stop the narrative that this is only an issue for young men, and responses need to take into account women and young girls, their exposure to gambling advertising, as well as how this may lead to more women engaging in gambling in the future.
Yeah, and hear all these things as an attempt to normalise it, that you can't have normal human interactions, whether it's between a group of guys or a group of female friends. You can't have, this is the image, this is the message constantly, isn't it? If friendship doesn't exist without this means of gambling as a shared interest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw this with the ads around Rihanna's, the first song they were going to perform. A lot of people on TikTok were talking about how they think she's going to start the performance. And then here comes the marketing from the gambling industry that says, how about you take what you're already having conversations about with your friends and take that and bet on it. So we're adding betting into conversations that don't actually need it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating little dive into the way the gambling message is changing and trying to grab in this new audience. Hey, Simone, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's Dr. Simone McCarthy from the Institute for Health Transformation at Deakin University. The gambling industry, the online gambling industry in particular, reaches out often through influencers, and the idea of novelty bets on things like Rihanna and her song choice tries to reach out to a new female audience.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
On the roads of Beverly Hills, King George's Road at Stony Creek Road, a truck breakdown there, one of 4 northbound lanes closed. That's lane 1. At Wetherill Park, the Horsley Drive at Cowpasture Road, a truck breakdown there. Northbound traffic is affected. If you're in Clyde, M4 motorway just past the Church Street on-ramp, 3 vehicles involved in a crash there. Significant delays westbound. And at Northmead, Bryans Road approaching Kleins Road, a van breakdown with 1 eastbound lane closed. Last one is North Sydney, Warringah Freeway approaching Falcon Street. We've got a truck breakdown there with 1 northbound lane closed. Although it's interesting, you have to complain to even get that, right? But they complained, and so they at least get something. The bank's final comment: your complaint will go through to our complaints team to assess, and depending on how many complaints they receive pertaining to the same issues, changes can and will be made. This is kept on file for you, and in future, if you choose to bank with us again, it may assist in providing you a better service and a better rate. I hope you can enjoy the rest of your day, Margaret, they said. Is there anything else I can help you with today? As Margaret says, what a joke. We'll talk a bit about the ACCC's action a little later. It's currently 4:20 here on ABC Radio Sydney. 26 degrees in the city, 28 in Camden. In Gosford, it's 24. In Mount Boyce, it's 22. Penrith is 29. And in Cronulla, 26 degrees. Partly cloudy today. Tomorrow, the chance of fog in the outer west in the early morning. Should be sunny, though. A minimum of 18 and a maximum of 28 degrees. Finance coming up in a moment.
G'day, this is Josh Zepps, the host of Afternoons with Josh Zepps, obviously. And you know what's on this Sunday? It's Mardi Gras Fair Day, and I will be in the thick of it, broadcasting into the weekend's show from the fair, bringing you all the outdoor fun. Don't miss it, Sunday from 10 a.m. to midday with me, Josh Zepps, the host of Afternoons with Josh Zepps, live from Fair Day this Sunday.
Celebrate Sydney World Pride 2023.
ABC Radio Sydney.
And just on the text, thank you for this. 4-car crash on the Harbour Bridge southbound. And traffic, according to my texter, is held up way back. And Ian Verinder, our ABC business editor, is here. Good afternoon.
G'day, Richard.
Yeah, we had a big down day today.
Did, off more than 1% today. And look, Wall Street had a slightly mixed performance overnight, so we really outdid the selling on Wall Street. And, look, some inflation numbers came out overnight in New York or Washington. And, look, they showed that inflation is continuing to trend downwards in the States. Not as much, by as much as a lot of people had hoped or expected, but we've seen 7 months straight of declines in inflation in the US on an annual basis, at least. There were some indications that some sectors, were ticking back upwards, but it's down to 6.4%. And you think back to last June when it peaked at 9.1, it definitely has come off quite a lot.
Yeah, and that's the hope here too, isn't it? That the worst is over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the Commonwealth, we've just been talking about the banks and this gap between what you pay for a mortgage and what you get on a term deposit. The ACCC has launched an inquiry today into that gap and into the speed at which higher rates are offered in one case, but not the other. Interesting in that context, the Commonwealth Bank's record profit today.
It is, but look, all the banks were heavily sold off today after the Commonwealth Bank's record profit, and they're the reason for the market dropping so heavily today. So all of the banks were down. The Commonwealth was down 5.7% on this record half-year profit and a big lift in the dividend. And it's all because a lot of analysts have taken the view that what's known as the net interest margin, that's the gap between what they pay for deposits and what they charge to lend out in loans, that gap has peaked and it's actually going to start to narrow.
Okay, why? Why will it narrow since they've been getting away with it?
Well, look, it's not really that they're getting away with. I'll explain how it works. There's a whole lot of deposits that we have money in the bank where we get virtually no interest for. You know your savings account?
Yeah, nothing. Yeah,
nothing, right? So there's a huge amount of...
You know that at tax time because you look it up and you think, I better pay some tax on...
$2.57.
or nothing,
Yeah, so there's a lot of deposits out there that earn absolutely zero in terms of interest. And it's really only term deposits and investment accounts, investment savings accounts, that where they compete and actually offer, decent interest rates on there. So when interest rates are falling and the banks are cutting, mortgage rates and everything, you've got this whole rump of money and deposits that they don't have to pay out on. So the margins get squeezed right down because they can't drop the lower, all their deposit rates. Now, when
it's already zero.
Yeah. So when it's moving the other way, such as now, and interest rates are rising, you've got a whole lot of money that they're not paying out on, and they're lending out on money at a much higher rate. I mean, look, banking is the same as selling apples or anything else. Your profit margin is that bit in the middle between what you're paying for the product and what you're selling it for. And so,
but there's supposed to be competition to stop that. That's the theory, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. That's the theory. That's right. So the competition, though, is all around this. It's all around term deposits, and it's all around deposits where you lock your money in for a certain period of time, where there's restrictions about how much you can pull in and out. Whereas a savings account, you can go down and pull it all out, whatever you want to do. So look, if you break a term deposit, you actually give up the return that you're getting there. So, it's all about those restrictions.
I think the other thing, why it's an imperfect world, is that you tend to be sticky to your own bank because it's easier. So you don't, I was looking today at the term deposits, and I think, Westpac and Commonwealth Bank, if you, this is $10,000 for a year, Westpac is offering 2.7, I think I looked up, on CanStar, but the small institutions are offering 4.2. So, but can someone be bothered, I suppose, anyhow, having to prove their identity with another institution, putting the money in there, and the difficulty that they haven't got access through their ordinary bank account?
If you walk into your bank and you say, I'm going to go and, go to this other mob and get 4.2, I'll bet you suddenly get a better rate,
Yeah, better rate. But my texter said she did that today and with one of the big banks, and she has got a better rate. It's up by 0.15%.
Oh, okay, right.
0.1.
There you go, better than nothing, isn't it?
Nothing.
But look, there's loyalty earns you nothing, right?
Yeah.
And it's a proven fact that it's new customers that get all the showered with gifts. Whereas if you're a loyal customer and you've been there for half a century, it's you're bolted on, you're not going anywhere. We don't have to do anything for you.
Give him $5 and a tap on the bum.
I mean, one thing though about this, everyone's talking about the mortgage cliff and so forth. The banks are all expecting a lot of competition for refinancing, right? So they're expecting everybody to go out in the market once they're coming off their fixed rates and going to variable rates and saying, I need a decent deal here. So they're expecting that they're going to have to fight to keep people on board, once those...
Well, that's going to be difficult for some people because the house prices drop so much, they'll find that the other institution the competing institution won't want to take them on at all.
That's right. So it's not going to be pretty for a lot of people, but there's a lot of others who are going to, find themselves being able to negotiate a slightly better deal, as difficult and as painful as it will be, but slightly better than it would have otherwise been.
So, I grant it. The market says that things are going to be slightly tougher for the banks, bring out world's smallest violin. But still, break it to me. What was the Commonwealth Bank's profit?
It was $5.2 billion for the half year. So they're well and
half year?
Yeah, that's right. So they're well and truly on the way to break into double figures here for the full year, $10 billion.
Yeah, all right, $10 billion. Now, Philip Lowe pleading his case at Senate estimates, of course.
I've got to say to you, Richard, that, having watched it today, it's quite remarkable that the level of intelligence from some of the people who are our elected leaders. It was extraordinary
You
to
think
watch.
that they don't necessarily have an economics degree?
Economics degree, high school diploma, I don't know. It was extraordinary to watching some of it. But
the questions he was asked?
Yeah, they were stupid sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
Right.
Look, but I think he actually gave us a fairly good account of himself. I mean, he did make the point. He said, look, I'm not the Reserve Bank, I'm one of the people who sits on the board. And he said, I know it all comes back to me all the time and I'm the one to blame, but, I'm not the only one making a decision here. We sit down, there are 9 of us sitting around that boardroom table and we all make a decision and we all go through all the information and we do what we hope is the best for the country. And he said, look, we have got it wrong, but hopefully we'll be able to navigate our way through this. But
And I guess the other thing he said, which is not part of the debate for some reason, is how bad inflation is. Everyone's aware of the pain now of high interest rates, and it is incredibly painful for those people with mortgages. But we don't seem to acknowledge that what they're trying to do is stop the worst pain of all, which is built-in long-term inflation, which destroys people's lives and savings almost like nothing else.
Yeah, look, there's a big debate going on within the economics world, though, is this blunt tool of interest rates, is this the only thing you can use to kill inflation? And are we using the wrong measures anyway to, there's this old theory out there that, the Phillips curve, where you've got to get people unemployed to break inflation. Well, does that really hold true anymore? There's a lot of people who argue, no, it doesn't. And so the problem is with this lag that's involved in it all, you're pushing interest rates higher and higher. You're not really going to get you're slamming your foot on the brake and the economy's not going to really slow down for another 6 months. Have you hit too hard?
But the trouble is that a lot of it's a great intellectual argument. I read the excellent piece by one of your colleagues in the Herald, in the ABC website, talking about some of the various methods and quoting an essay that John Maynard Keynes wrote in 1936 or something. A lot of these other methods, they're intriguing, but they can't be brought in tomorrow. So some people say, okay, the much better method would be put up the GST, for instance, because then you tax everyone's spending. If you want to, if your aim is to reduce spending, put up the GST. Well, that's fine. I think that sounds very sensible, but that's not going to happen. There's no political will for that.
No.
It's certainly not going to happen tomorrow if you did want to try to put it to an election or something like that. The other method is some sort of form of forced savings so that you can say, well, during this period where we're trying to reduce spending, we're going to make sure that wages, a proportion of everyone's wages are either held back by the boss and given back to you later or put into your superannuation and given. Now, again, it's a great theory because it means that the excess money that you're trying to remove still stays adhered to the person rather than being given to a big bank.
Yeah.
Sounds great. But again, it's not going to happen tomorrow.
No,
it's not an answer to our current problem.
The political will just isn't there to do it. But I think the argument is formulating at the moment, and it is out there. I mean, there's a very small percentage of people who are going to be hit very, very hard by these interest rates. And is that really the way to do it? To, inflict all the pain onto just a small section of the population, mostly young people, by the way.
Yeah.
And, if you're older, if you're our age and, you've reasonably, settled, you're fine.
I suppose all I'm saying is that, yes, that's all absolutely true, but it's no good suggesting solutions to this, which in practical terms are either never going to happen in this country or if they were to happen would take years to install.
Yeah, well, but...
it's a great argument to have, an interesting argument to have.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's got to start somewhere, though.
But in practice, We can't engineer things so we say, okay, take off the foot off the brake entirely, and if people have to walk down the roads with wheelbarrows of money like Weimar Republic, well and good. I mean, that's no good.
That's
either.
all we've got at the moment. That's all we're using. We're only using interest rates to try and keep this in check. I guess the argument needs to be, though, is this the only way to go? And I think things do change. We do go through these, periods of, here's the intellectual framework, and this is what we're going to do, and then it slowly shifts across.
But with something like pulling down the trade barriers, for instance, the tariff walls, that's a debate that took 15 years or 20 years to go from the thought columns of the ABC and the Sydney Morning Herald to policy.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And then we probably went too far.
Ian, what were the All Ords and the dollar?
So the All Ords today down 1%, 7,559, and the dollar a little bit weaker, 69.30.
Thank you very much.
ABC Radio Sydney Traffic.
There's Ian Verendar, our ABC Business Editor, and here's Jeff Wallace from the Australian Traffic Network. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. Now, Milsons Point, we have a multi-car crash on the Bradfield Highway, which is a city-bound run, the lower section, opposite Milsons Point Station, approaching the Harbour Bridge. Have stopped all the traffic, lane 5 or lane 6 as well, as the fire crews put down some sand to absorb all the fluid leaking out of the cars. Your best bet, use the car, which is the upper section on the freeway, far left, heading towards the CBD. Also, at Villawood, a crash coming through, Woodville Road, northbound Villawood Road, and heading down towards Wollongong. Very slow, Heathcote to Waterfall for the Princess Highway. Emergency work taking out lane 2 through Waterfall. I'm Jeff Wallace from the Australian Traffic Network.
Jeff, thank you very much. Moz says at least upping the GST is hitting everyone, Richard, not penalising one section of the community, being young mortgage holders. Look, maybe I'm not explaining myself very well. I think some of these ideas are great. I think the GST idea, personally, I think that makes complete sense. I'm just saying... Yes, it's a good argument, and maybe it should happen, but it's not going to happen. It's certainly not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen in this economic cycle. It's not going to solve us from this particular problem. So, yeah, let's have a debate about that, and let's do it, and let's push our politicians to do it. But that's a long-term change, right? It's not a thing that's going to help us in this current battle. So, yes, it's a good thing to put forward, but it's also important to see it as a tool that's not available for use right now. I think that's a fair thing to say without... being accused of not understanding the pain that young mortgage holders are under at the moment. I do. It's 26 minutes to 5 here on Drive. Some news headlines. Adam Story, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. An emergency situation is unfolding at a mine site in northwestern Queensland where 2 workers are missing. Paramedics were called to the Dougal River mine site, 70 kilometres northwest of Cloncurry, following reports of a ground collapse. A child's body has been recovered in New Zealand's North Island, taking the death toll from Cyclone Gabrielle to 4. Police say they believe the child was caught in rising floodwaters yesterday in the Hawke's Bay area. The state's Energy Minister, Matt Keane, has announced moves that would sink offshore gas drilling plans between Sydney and Newcastle. It comes after the federal court ratified a decision to revoke the former Prime Minister Scott Morrison's decision to reject the controversial PEP 11 project. And Defence has revealed it's examining ways to make Australia's next fleet of warships more lethal. A recent audit has criticised progress on the British-designed Hunter-class frigate program, warning they could be outgunned by enemies. More news at 5.
Available now on ABC Listen. Enjoy our library of great Aussie audiobooks all summer long. Free to stream on the ABC Listen app. With a collection of fiction and non-fiction titles, including Kitty Flanagan's 488 Rules, The Thankless Art of Being Correct, and Bridge Burning and Other Hobbies.
The difference between me and every other cute kid, however, was that I had a dad who worked in advertising.
A great range of ABC audiobooks. Free to stream on the ABC Listen app.
Yeah, the day in politics with David Spears in just a second. The forecast for the rest of today, a slight 30% chance of a shower, mainly in the coast. Oh, actually, that's for this morning, so that's we're past that. We're past that. We'll just do the current temperatures, I think. 26 in the city, 28 in Camden, 24 in Gosford, 22 in Mount Boyce, 29 in Penrith and 26 in Cronulla. Tomorrow, the chance of a fog in the outer west in the early morning. Sunny with a minimum of 18 and a maximum of 28. Friday, mostly sunny, light winds becoming northeasterly, 20 to 30 kilometres during the day. On Saturday, a sunny morning with a chance of morning fog in the west, the chance of a thunderstorm in the afternoon and evening. And Sunday, a minimum of 21, a maximum of 29, partly cloudy with the chance of a thunderstorm later in the day. Tom Saunders will have a full forecast for you at about 5:30. 1300 222 702 is the number here on Drive. Just this weird story from the United States. People talk sometimes about cancel culture as if it's all left-wing people cancelling right-wing people. Someone accused me yesterday when I talked about some parents at Scots College being a bit wary of Tony Abbott giving a big speech to their boys. They say, "Oh, you're indulging in cancel culture." It's seen as always something that you supposedly progressive people, I hope I am, do towards right-wing people. Not always the case, though. A concert by the King's Singers at a university in Florida, I read, was cancelled 2 hours before they were due on stage because the college, it's a Pensacola Christian college, suddenly realised that one of them was gay. They're an a cappella singing group, and rumours started spreading among the students that one of them was gay. And this got to the parents, and the parents urgently, got onto the school authorities. And this group that was formed in Cambridge back in 1968. It won a Grammy in 2009. Absolutely famous. They perform around the world, and they were about to go on and say, no. The people who booked the King's Singers did not do their due diligence, and several of the students found out that one of the singers in the group is gay. These students started spreading the word around campus, and a group of parents got hold of the information, and they were extremely upset that their kids will be listening to a group sing that has a gay member. What about that? Singing songs sung by a group with one gay member. I would have thought a good a cappella group from Cambridge would have more than one gay member, but there you go. It is 22 minutes to 5 here on ABC Radio Sydney.
Members on my right.
Well, hang on.
Members on my left.
I will not be lectured about sexism.
You sit down, Buffett. Order. Mr. Speaker. Google it, mate.
How pathetic. What sort of person does that?
Order, Buffett.
David Spears joins us, host of Insiders on ABC TV. David, good afternoon.
Very good afternoon, Richard.
Yeah, we just had Ian Verander's economic perspective on what happened in Canberra today with Philip Lowe. What's your political perspective on how he went?
Well, it was fascinating. I sat in the room for the hour and a half that Philip Lowe was in there taking questions. And I should note this is a bit of a warm-up, I reckon, for a tougher grilling that'll come on Friday. Today was the Senate committee. Friday will be the House of Reps Economics Committee. They've got some more well-credentialed economists, and of course, lower house MPs usually have more skin in the game in terms of angry voters in their electorates giving them direct feedback. But nonetheless, today was fascinating because one of those senators asking him questions is the Greens' Nick McKim, who's been issuing daily demands for the scalp of Philip Lowe. And he probably went in the hardest today. But I've got to say, Phil Lowe looked pretty calm, as he typically does, untroubled by most of the questions, took the opportunity to make a pretty compelling case to consider the alternative here. If you don't get inflation down, and particularly to that target zone, it is going to hit the poorest the hardest. And he came back to that point again and again. And I just don't think the critics, including the Greens, have really laid out what sort of inflation rate they're comfortable with and how they think it would impact on the most vulnerable. So I thought it was a pretty good point that he made.
And as we're discussing, there are alternatives. There are, you could raise the GST, you could make forced savings under the super scheme, you could put in an extra Medicare levy. But, and these tools are a great subject for an intellectual discussion, but they're not particularly available for use right now.
And not by the Reserve Bank. These are all tools of government, right? Yes, the government could increase taxes. It could do something with the GST. It could do all sorts of things. The government looks after fiscal policy, but both Philip Lowe, the Reserve Bank governor, and before him this morning, the head of Treasury, Stephen Kennedy, made the same point. It's not exactly a rapid way of responding to the cycle. Yes, during COVID, it was quick to pump money out the door, but you think about it in the real world. If you're going to increase taxes, you've got to get that through the Parliament, through the Senate. Good luck with that. The lag on these things is enormous when the Reserve Bank can very swiftly move interest rates. Both agreed, the Treasury and the Reserve Bank, that this is the better way to go.
In practical terms, the history of this thing in Australia is that GSTs can only be put up after an election. Howard took it to the electorate. It'd be difficult for a government to say, well, if Howard took it to an electorate, took it to an election, we're just going to bring it in mid-term.
And since Kim Beazley, Labor hasn't gone anywhere near it, right? And this has been a long time. I was here, I remember it. But since then, even Bill Shorten, when he took all those other tax changes, negative gearing, capital gains tax. GST was no-go. You wouldn't go near it because of that experience under Beazley. So no.
Which again is not to say that might not be a good idea. It's just to talk about the practicalities of it.
Let's live in the real world for a moment and consider. Now, that's not to say that Philip Lowe doesn't deserve criticism. Yes, I think he's still carrying a lot of baggage for wrongly suggesting to people that he wouldn't lift rates till 2024. Yes, he had to give a bit of a mea culpa today over that private lunch with bankers that he held last week that the Financial Review exposed. And he said, look, the timing was the problem there. We won't do that again. But look, by and large, what he's doing, his point today was, what are the options here? This is a far better alternative to leaving inflation at a level. What are the Greens and others saying? Leave it at 5%, 4%. His point is, if you did that, you would hurt the poor the most. It would exacerbate income inequality.
And look, I don't particularly want to be sitting here being some sort of appointed defender of Philip Lowe, but it is interesting the tone of absolute kind of contempt for him that seems to be around and personal attack. In a circumstance where every similar country in the world has similar settings or has high interest rates and a reserve bank or a central bank which is trying to do something about it.
And most of them higher than the settings here in terms of interest rates. His other point that he made a few times today, in fact, it was his final words before the committee hearing, it's not just me, it's a board of 9. And he suggested that they do make unanimous decisions on all of these interest rate rises over the last year. Now, maybe that's a bit of a naive point to make. I don't think, the tabloids and other critics are going to start identifying all 9 members. He's the guy at the top. He's got to wear it. But he was pleading for a bit of perspective there, that this is a collective decision of a group of people. The other point to make, of course, is the government's reviewing the structure of the RBA. It'll also be reviewing whether Philip Lowe sticks around for another term or not. That'll happen in the coming months. We could see quite a change to the structure of the Reserve Bank.
Yeah, David Spears is with us. Let's listen into the RBA Governor, Philip Lowe. He says that raising interest rates works much faster than fiscal policy to address surging inflation.
At the moment, aggregate demand growth has been too strong, and interest rates are part of the way that we bring that back down again. Interest rates are a nimble policy tool. They're a blunt policy tool, but they're nimble. The received wisdom over recent time is that fiscal policy, most of the time, is not as effective as managing the cycle. Because if you're going to have fiscal measures introduced, it has to go through the House of Representatives, the Senate, and that takes time.
That's Philip Lowe from earlier today. Governor Lowe also mentioned that he shouldn't be considered solely responsible for these decisions, as David mentioned.
It's not just me making these decisions. There are 9 people based on the advice of a large staff. So that's the world we operate in. I'm not complaining about it. That's our job, and it's unpopular. And I accept that. That's why the central bank is independent in its decision-making from the political process. It's easier for me to do unpopular things than it is for maybe some of you. I don't know.
Okay, but I mean, did you see that Media Watch report? He's got reporters camped out outside his house like he's some sort of mass murderer.
I know, and I like that little line there. It's easier for me to do unpopular things than some of you politicians, and he's right. I mean,
well, that's why it's independent. That's the whole point, isn't
it? Exactly. And look, this really isn't easy. Now, like you, I'm saying they got everything right. Maybe there is a case for pausing for a while to see whether inflation is going to come down. But I think he did make a powerful point today that we cannot leave inflation too high. It's way too high now. But even if it settles around 5% or so, that's historically still going to be a problem. So, yeah, I thought that was a point that he made well today.
David Spears is with us, host of Insiders on ABC TV. Meanwhile, the Greens are attempting to get a moratorium on new coal and gas plants from the government. They've always had this kind of uneasy relationship. They want to not be blockers as they have possibly been in previous administrations, but they also want to try to push the government a little.
Yeah, and this comes back to, I guess, memories of 2009 when the Greens blocked the Rudd government's CPRS, the first iteration of an emissions trading scheme in Australia. Didn't get through because the Greens and the Abbott opposition, the coalition, opposed it, and we didn't get anything done really on meaningful climate action for years after that. So those memories are still there. Look, what we're talking about here with the safeguards mechanism, this is the main pathway for the government to achieve its climate targets of of 43% by 2030, net zero by 2050. And if they can't get it through, well, they're in all sorts of strife. So look, the coalition have said no, they're not going to back it. Despite the fact that every business group reckons they should. This was actually the idea of the Business Council to do it this way. For the Greens, well, look, you can sort of see where they're coming from. They've got a pretty clear line: no new coal, no new gas. But, does that mean blocking this altogether? They haven't quite said they would go that far. The argument from the government, well, look, do this, we can have the argument about going further, but at least let's get this in place.
And I guess the argument, some people say that we can't, enthusiastic though we all are for renewables, it's a process. It's not something that can be done overnight. And you don't want a situation where Australian manufacturing, something like a brick plant, is forced to close down because they can't get cheap enough gas to operate the thing.
Yeah, and look, there'll be people listening who'll go, hang on, pumped hydro and batteries can already do it at a reasonable price. Most of the experts that the government has in the energy market, though, are saying gas in particular is going to be with us for some years to come. That's the reality of the formal advice they're getting. So, no, they don't want to transition away from that too quickly.
Let's listen, though, to the Greens, to the spokesperson on mining and resources, Dorinda Cox.
Our position is very clear that we do not want any more new coal and gas mines open up in this country. We're in the middle of a climate crisis and we can't continue to pour petrol on the fire. We want to work with the government and we've offered to pass this legislation, but we need to see real action on there being no new coal and gas opened up in this country. We'll continue those negotiations. This has been a very kind offer that we've put on the table to the government to overlook other components of this legislation.
Well, there you go. A kind offer, says Dorinda Cox. What does the opposition say? Well, actually, let's listen from the government first. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Chris Bowen, says the government is open to negotiation but won't compromise on their election mandate.
Look, I found the Greens obviously throw both the climate change bill and the energy relief package willing to talk on matters of good faith. There are matters we disagree with. They're different political parties, with different agendas. We respect theirs and they respect ours. Where we can come together, we'll continue to do so. Ultimately, they have a party room. The leader of the Greens can put a position to his party room. He knows how to navigate through his party room better than I do. But speaking on behalf of the government, we will not agree to anything not in keeping with our election mandate.
There's Chris Bowen for the government. So what does the opposition say? Here's Susan Lee on Sky this morning.
I want to send a clear warning to Labor. Do not sell off regional jobs and regional industries in the Hunter, in Queensland, in Western Australia for dodgy deals with the Greens in order to get this legislation through the Parliament. Do not sell off the future of our regions and the prosperity of our regional communities. Well, we don't support the policy because it is effectively a tax on business. There
you go. There's Susan Lee on Sky. We're with David Spears from Insiders on ABC TV. David, the other big story today, story really this month, are these swirling allegations that in the UK and Australia that there may have been instances where former ADF personnel have gone to China to train particularly pilots in the operation of military aircraft.
Yeah, and even someone being held in detention in Australia in relation to this, an American citizen, as I understand it. So, look, yes, they've got to be absolutely careful that this isn't happening. It kind of beggars belief. It's a bit mind-boggling that it would happen, right? But
where's your loyalty? You've served your country. Presumably with distinction. You've been paid to do it. You've been trained very well, and then you go and deal with the country that is obviously one of the countries we're worried about.
Yeah, exactly. And look, there are provisions in law to prevent that happening, but presumably, if any of that needs to be tightened up, that will happen.
Yeah, well, let's listen to the Defence Minister, Richard Marles. He's announced this tightening of laws to ensure retired military personnel will protect national security secrets.
Firstly, everyone who's a part of the Australian Defence Force right now knows what's expected of them. So I want that to be really clear. We do have very robust policies and law in place when people become in possession of one of our nation's secrets. But the report did recommend that we develop legislation to remove any doubt around the full breadth of that the secrets that need to be maintained. And yes, we will be developing that legislation.
Yeah, there's Richard Miles, and I'm sure that's one of the issues where he's going to absolutely have the support of the opposition.
Yeah, there's that, and also removing these Chinese-made security cameras that apparently have been sitting for years in MPs, electorate offices, and other government departments, and so on. So on all sorts of fronts, yes, they're constantly having to. It's a game of cat and mouse, right? Keep up with the threats, the potential challenges they're facing.
Isn't it? I've forgotten the figure. Is it 88 cameras were inside parliamentary offices? Whoops.
Whoops. Yeah, but I should point out the Liberals made a big song and dance about this the other day. But these cameras, as far as I'm aware, were sitting there, and advice was given to the then coalition government to do something about them for quite some time.
Yeah, well, it's like the Huawei thing, isn't it? It's like letting the Russians run your postal service during the Cold War. It's not a great idea. Hey, thanks so much.
Thanks, Richard.
There's the host of Insiders. And you'll see that program on ABC TV on Sunday. And if you're not near a TV set, of course, you can listen to the audio on News Radio. 8 minutes to 5 is the time here on ABC Radio Sydney. Quick check of the traffic if you're battling around on the roads, and then we'll have the day in sport.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
Oh, a fascinating Self-Improvement Wednesday coming up at about 5:15. We're going to go back to the world of ancient Rome and talk about how education was done in ancient Rome. We'll talk a bit about primary schools and boys and girls and all of that sort of stuff. But we're also going to talk about what happened in secondary school, which was an intense focus on what you could call mock trials, in which they'd kind of be... They represent lawyers dealing with various crimes. But the crimes were made up, and the law was made up too. It was all set on this sort of fantasy kingdom that they created, with its own laws and its own problems and its own principles. Why was that chosen as the way to teach young Romans, how to be good citizens? That's your lesson in Self-Improvement Wednesday at about 5:15. Currently, 7 minutes to 5. Not too bad on the roads. Milsons Point, Warringah Freeway, just past the High Street overpass. 4 vehicles involved in an accident there. 1 of 4 southbound lanes closed. That's lane 5. And at Beverly Hills, King George's Road at Stony Creek Road, a truck breakdown with 1 of 4 northbound lanes closed. That's lane 1. That's the latest here on Drive.
The quest for the big brass mug continues. On the new season of Hard Quiz, award-winning comedian Tom Gleeson is throwing down the gauntlet to some new contestants.
You made that sound really creepy.
And challenging some more unusual expert subjects.
When you thought things wouldn't get weirder, Sam, colonoscopies is your expert.
The new season of Hard Quiz.
Nothing's weird on this show, mate.
Wednesday nights on ABC TV and streaming on ABC iView.
And it's David Mark, our ABC National Sports reporter. Good afternoon.
Hey, Richard. How you going?
Good. Now, Australia's women's cricket team have a win over Bangladesh.
Yeah, in the T20 World Cup in South Africa. So Bangladesh batted first. They scored 107 in their 20 overs. And the interesting news there is that Georgia Wareham, who's a leg spin bowler, hasn't played for Australia for 16 months, came back for her first game in that time, and she took 3 wickets for 20 runs. So that's a great way to come back. And then in reply, Australia, it wasn't massively easy, but they did score the runs in 18.2 overs. They lost 2 wickets. Meg Lanning, the captain, is in good form, and she scored 48 in her return. She's returning to cricket for this competition. So Australia at the moment undefeated in the competitions. Early days yet, but they're looking to defend the T20 crown they won 3 years ago at the MCG.
Yeah, good luck to them. Now, the launch of the Super Rugby season today.
Yeah, and that's a week or so away from starting. It starts on, I think, Friday week. And I went along to the launch today, mainly because it was at the Opera House, so it was a nice day for it. But really all the talk is about the World Cup, which is going to be held in September this year in France. And, of course, Eddie Jones is back as the Australian coach. So it was really interesting to talk to the captains and the coaches of the Super Rugby Pacific competition about how they're feeling about this World Cup year and how they kind of, trying to keep their minds on the job at hand, which is the Super Rugby competition, while every single player is thinking in the back of their minds about how, they want to get selected in Eddie Jones' side to play in the World Cup. And, for instance, I had a chat to Jake Gordon, the New South Wales Waratahs coach, and he sort of said, look, he's made the mistake in the past of concentrating too much on trying to get selected for the World Cup only to not get selected. So, yeah, you got to think about the job at hand. But it's going to begin in a week and a bit, and the Brumbies are playing the Waratahs at the football stadium to kick things off. And Richard, I might just chat very quickly about an event coming up tomorrow too in terms of launches, and that is the Cup of Nations, the soccer tournament involving women's soccer teams from around the world and Australia. Starts tomorrow in Gosford with Spain playing Jamaica and Australia playing the Czech Republic, and then there are games on in Sydney on Sunday and then in Newcastle next Wednesday.
Okay, now in the AFL, Toby Green announced as the solo captain of the Greater Western Sydney Giants.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because Green was a co-captain last year with Stephen Coniglio and Josh Kelly, and prior to that, Coniglio had been a sole captain. So there were three captains, but new coach this year at the Greater Western Sydney Giants, and he, Adam Kingsley, has decided basically, no, we're just going to have one, go with the old model, and it's going to be Toby Green. And it's an interesting choice because, Toby Green, for so many people outside of the Giants, see him as the bad boy of Australian football. He's probably one of the most reviled figures in the game, and yet internally at the Greater Western Sydney Giants, he's hugely admired. And so in some ways, it's not at all surprised to see him as the captain. It's really exciting news for him. He's had his problems in the AFL. He's been suspended so many times and so on. But as I said, he's very admired in the club. Bit tough for Josh Kelly and Steve Coniglio, who had been captains, but they'll be vice captains. And just by the way, the Swans haven't announced who their captains will be this year, but there's no reason to think that they'll move on from the three co-captains that they have, Luke Parker, Dane Rampy and Callum Mills.
Yeah. Hey, good on you, David. Thank you.
No worries, Richard.
David Mark, our ABC National sports reporter. I mentioned the story about the Cambridge group, which has been around since the 60s, the King's Singers. They're very famous for beautiful a cappella music. They've won Grammy Awards and all that sort of stuff. And they've been, the news today is that they've been told by Pensacola Christian College in Florida that they can't perform. They were given 2 hours warning, cancelled with 2 hours warning because they'd discovered that one of the members, I think there's about sort of 8 of them in the group, one of them's gay. And that shocking news was enough to cause the parents to go into paroxysms that it's just a concert of songs, right? It wasn't a lecture or anything, a concert of songs. But somehow the students, just the fact that the guy was gay was enough to send them into paroxysm. Lucy in Chatswood said, would these parents be the same parents who emptied school libraries in America of books that have been read for generations, including their generation, thereby proving nothing happens to you by reading the said books? That's from Lucy in Chatswood. The subject of the ADF personnel, or the suggestions that ADF personnel, very limited numbers, of course, most are completely 99.999, very loyal, but some suggestion that in both the UK and here that some people have been selling their skills to China. People going to China to train pilots are loyal. They're loyal to the almighty dollar, says Gaz. Capitalism is alive and well in China, it appears. And whilst they're tightening the rules for the ADF, can they tighten the rules for what politicians do after politics? That's from David on the text. In terms of the mortgages and being a young person who's got a mortgage and suffering from these rates, there's a great message on that from David in Arncliffe, which I might share to you because I can hear share to you in a moment because I can hear the news coming up. Lots coming up. Kathleen Folbig inquiry and that great Self-Improvement Wednesday. But some news first. It's 5 o'clock.